Gonna give you guys some information here on F20 and F22 engines and basically their Vtec system, some ways I found out to test some stuff. I've had to figure all this out mainly so that I could eliminate problems that were causing my hesitation or bog on Vtec engagement. A lot of guys will tell you it's a Vtec solenoid. Sometimes that's what it is, a lot of times it's not. What I'm going to do real quick is a quick overview of how the system works, and as I go along, I'm going to give you some things that you can check for. Okay, first of all, the oil comes from the filter through this hole into this gallery, okay, and that goes clear through to the back of the block. It does your main bearings, other stuff like that, but it also goes straight up through this hole into the head. Okay, this hole has a little hole drilled in the side. That's where your factory oil pressure sender goes. Okay, so that's a good place to check for mechanical oil pressure. If you have good mechanical oil pressure here, you know, 70 psi is what I'd probably like to see when you're trying to engage Vtec. I think the spec is like you have to have 55 or something like that, but still, you know, my car makes 70 with no problems. Okay, so it comes up through this hole. Now, some guys, when they put a head gasket on here, they'll put way too much RTV around here, and potentially that RTV could go over here and clog this up. Now, what I recommend you do is you take and you remove your Vtec solenoid, and this hole down here is what feeds into it from down there, from the block. It's just a hole that goes straight up and comes out right there. So you can take a zip tie, get a long one that goes down, because you see how far that hole can go down the block. It goes, I don't know, probably like 5 inches or so, maybe 6 inches below the block's deck. So you probably want, you know, something that'll go at least like probably 8-10 inches. So you can stick a little zip tie down there and make sure it goes all the way through. If it goes all the way through here, then you know there's no RTV or anything blocking that. Now, on the Vtec solenoid, there's a switch right here. That switch will stay closed when there's no oil pressure. In other words, it basically, you know, you can supply voltage to one side and voltage comes out the other side. It opens when it has adequate oil pressure for Vtec engagement. So you can take around a little test lead from that, you know, 2 wires up into your car, and you can actually take and hook it up to like an ohm meter on continuity, and it should beep whenever you get high enough oil pressure. So if you're getting high enough oil pressure here, your problem probably isn't any of that stuff. It's not your oil pump. It's not any of that other stuff, because you have plenty there. So you're eliminating everything before it. Now, inside of the Vtec solenoid, it has a couple small orifices. One of the small orifices allows oil to go through here constantly to provide lubrication to the camshafts, rocker arms, and stuff during normal operation. It also has a small opening that goes over to this, and this actually provides oil down to the timing chain tensioner. There's a little hole down there. You can run a piece of wire through this and check this passage to make sure it didn't get restricted. Maybe whenever you put your tensioner in, the O-ring got caught and the O-ring like filled up that hole and blocked it or something. You could check it, clean it, whatever. You know, so if you put a new tensioner on there, maybe your timing chain's still rattling, you put another one on, it's still rattling, check that hole. Make sure you don't have a blockage there. Easy peasy. This port right here looks like it's just literally like a vent port. It goes up to this little hole. This is a test hole. Whenever you do a Vtec test with the apparatus that supplies air and oil up here to check all the stuff for locking, you have to block this hole. Not a big deal. Most people are never going to need to do that. I did do it, but you know, we'll get to that later. So the oil comes out of this hole all the time. And whenever you hit Vtec and this little spool valve actually opens up, it allows more oil to go over there. Because what this does is it's not really meant to be an on-off, because if it was off, it would starve the cams in the top end for oil. It just changes the volume. Whenever you have, you know, a little bit of volume coming through here, it actually has so much leakage over there, it doesn't build much pressure. So it doesn't push the rocker arm assemblies together. Okay, whenever it opens up and supplies lots of volume of oil, that's when it can actually push and build enough pressure and push all those rocker arm assemblies together. Okay, this hole, you can check it. It's a little bit harder to check, but you can check it with a zip tie. It actually goes through, and it goes into the actual head bolt opening. You can kind of see down there. There's a little drilled hole that goes clear across the block. You can even see it in that head bolt. And you can see the hole clear over here where they plugged it from when it was manufactured. So do be careful. If somebody was a real idiot or something, I don't know why you would do it, but maybe they thought it was a small block Chevy or something old, and put RTV on their head bolts, you could actually clog that hole down in there. That could potentially happen. Make sure that's free. That hole's main purpose is to provide oil to this hole right here. Okay? Now, once it gets oil up here, it goes across an opening in here. There's a little orifice in that opening that feeds this. This provides lubrication for your cam bolt. I guess it's actually a cam idler bolt, but lubricates that. So now we know where all of our oil is going into our rocker arm and cam assembly, and it's right here. Nowhere else. Just there. None of these other holes supply any oil to it. Okay, so now we get to that bad boy. That oil comes up to the bottom of this. Okay. You can see the little feed hole for that front idler gear right there, and there's a little orifice. It's kind of hard to see, but it's down inside of there. And it just, controls it because you don't want a huge leak there. It wouldn't lubricate the rest of the system. So, oil comes up in here and goes through these two holes. These two holes just come up through there, okay? These bolts are undersized. And what happens is because of the undersize that they have, see that gap? It lets oil flow around that gap, and that gap allows the oil to go into these, which then feeds the rocker arm assemblies. Okay? So, obviously, it's important that the bolt is like a smaller bolt than the opening. No big deal there. The lubrication, while we're still talking about this for the camshafts, the only actual journals on this that have oil feed holes are these right here on the very front one. See, there's the other one. And you'll notice that these journals, they just literally are drilled down into like this bolt hole. They go from there to there. No big deal. Okay. So all the other journals, no holes. None. They don't feed. Okay, this is the only one that does all of your feeding. Now, when it feeds into that hole there, it goes into the camshaft through that. It comes out there for, basically these gears have like a overdrive type, overrunner type thing that it puts oil pressure against it so it doesn't make weird noises. It helps reduce noise. It goes through this camshaft though, comes out all of these holes and lubricates the whole entire cam through the center of the cams. Now on these parts, what you have going on is all this oil is flowing through here. When you get a high enough volume of oil, it starts creating more resistance, makes the pressure higher here. You hopefully get enough pressure where that makes these start to work. FYI, these are rocker arm sets. Honda does not sell individual rocker arms. You have to buy a set of 3. They are matched. You do not want to mix match them. Also, and supposedly a lot of people say that the pins inside of them are specific and you can have issues if you get them mixed up. I've played around with them before, especially on this one because I have a part for learning purposes. It doesn't really seem to matter on mine. I don't get any of them to bind in alternate ones, but supposedly you can. Okay, so now the differences between these 3. This is one of your sets, and obviously it goes on, your rocker arm shaft. One of these has a hole in it that way, and that hole feeds this piston. Whenever you have enough oil pressure, it pushes this piston out, and that piston pushes this piston, which I'll just go ahead and try to get out of there. And this piston pushes into this arm. This one has a spring in it, okay? You know the spring one because it has no opening to supply oil because it doesn't need any oil to that thing. It just sits there. It also has an opening on that end to vent through so they don't get hydrolocked or anything stupid. Okay, go ahead and take this out. It's kind of a bitch to get these out. They'll fall out on you though when you don't want them to. But if you want them to come out, you just about need 2 hands. Give me just a second here. Okay. Alrighty, so your oil comes in through that hole. There's a little groove in there that allows oil to get back behind that piece. It's a solid piece. It must be a solid one for this one. And it builds pressure behind it and pushes it out. Now, you want to check this thing, make sure it's moving smoothly in the bore, make sure it's not grabbing hard. Obviously, it can't be sloppy loose or it'd lose too much pressure, but it can't bind. So what happens with it is I already pushed this one out a little bit. but it will actually come out and it will push into this one. So you need to make sure that it can fit in that hole and transition smoothly. It should transition from both of those to one another. Okay, we'll go ahead and put that back in there. And then this one should be able to push in on that one. And it should have resistance because there's a spring in there. If it doesn't, then it would try to engage when it's not supposed to. But it does press in there. It doesn't press in super far, just a little ways, like maybe a 1/4 inch or so, maybe 1/2 inch at the most. I think it's about 1/4. Okay, so if you make sure that all of those on all of these float freely between the three, the assembly should work fine. They should engage good. Some people had questions about mixing these up because they took it all apart, okay? My recommendation is if you take something like this apart, you do like I do. You lay it out as sets, you lay it out how it came apart, you don't mix the shit up, otherwise you got problems. Unless you really know what you're doing, then you can put it back together. But if you do, you'll notice that this is a very short distance from there to the bolt, and this is a very large distance. If you turn this around and try to put this other cam cap on there, it won't line up. You won't have a problem with that. Alternatively, you can't really turn these the wrong direction because the bolt holes have to go through those openings, okay? If that bolt doesn't line up, you ain't gonna put it in. So, yeah. So, like, once I get that bolt in there, and you can see there's some slop in it, and the reason why is because these actually have to be bigger than the bolt so that oil can get up through that opening. Not a big deal, but just something that, you know, for you to understand, because you can't really mess that up. Just, it's a good idea to know. The cams, I already went through how those are lubricated. I went through how those work and engage. There's a test because these bolts do not obstruct that and it uses those holes. Honda has a test. You take 2 of these bolts out over here from the cam caps and you install some bolts that have holes. Apply oil or air pressure to them, and then the air pressure is going to go through here, and you should be able to check these. You'll want to check them at TDC of each cylinder. You'll try to grab like the middle rocker and push it around is what I do. If I can force the middle rocker up and down, you know, independently of those, it's not engaged. If it doesn't want to move at all, then it's probably engaged. You know, you could also, they tell you to just wiggle one of the outside ones, but you only have so much valve lash, so it's kind of hard to tell, and I'm strong enough I can overcome that if it's not. I'll show you what I made to test that, but truthfully, it really didn't do a whole lot of help. I feel like the best test is to test your switch at the Vtec solenoid. Make sure you got good oil pressure there for it to engage. If you got good oil pressure there for it to engage, then your next step would probably be to make sure that it is actually going into Vtec and the Vtec solenoid's good, which you could just rev the engine to like, I don't know, 4,000 RPMs, send there, no load, and you could just supply 12-volt power to this and see if it makes an audible change. If it makes an audible change, then you know it's actually trying to go into Vtec, okay? Here's the little setup I made. I just took a couple of these bolts. We lathed some holes down them, put some holes through them, supply air through there, connected all to a pressure regulator, boom. The problem is air does not seal as good as oil does. And it's really hard to get enough volume of air through that to overcome all the leaks past all those little rocker arms and everything else. So if you're going to try to do that test, you need to take and run the engine, pull it apart, put those 2 in there, test number 1, and then you need to take and like pull one of those hoses off and like pressurize oil through it. I have like one of those oil primers that I can use. You pump it up, supply oil, fill the cam, you know, the rocker arm shafts full of oil again, then do it again for the next cylinder. If you do that each time, it seems to be pretty consistent. It holds pressure better, works better, all that fun stuff. But once it blows that oil out of these and there's no longer any oil in here to help seal, it just goes crazy and doesn't do you any good. So I hope that helped you guys a little. Obviously, you know, that ain't gonna fix everything because there could be something else wrong, which in my case, that's what I found out is I have a different problem because I've exhausted everything in relationship to Vtec, at least as far as mechanical and normal electrical and oil pressure wise. So good luck, guys.